Members of the public and reporters in the hearing room are not permitted to use any electronic devices during the hearing. If you wish to do this, you can do so in the annex. Legal representatives, please remember that though you are allowed to use such equipment in the hearing room, you may not transmit anything to the outside world until 10 minutes after it has been said or displayed. These are important requirements which are the subject of the Chair's ruling and a restriction order. The Chair may also make further restriction orders during the course of the evidence. Breach of such orders is a criminal offence. For those viewing in the annex, you will not receive any information until the 10-minute period has elapsed, so you may transmit information as soon as you see it. Also, please remember in the hearing room that those viewing proceedings in the annex will still have 10 minutes of the hearings to go when we finish. So please try to be quiet in the entrance lobby when you leave. Thank you.
Miss Whitelaw.
Good morning, sir. Before we call our first witness today, if I may, we'll adduce evidence from a witness, Joseph Vivas, who is the Puig Operations Vice President. Puig is the company which owns the brand Nina Ricci.
Right.
I'd propose to do that in a little detail given the content of the evidence. The witness statement is dated the 12th of February 2024, and we'll go to it, please. It's INQ 005821. You see it there. Joseph Vivas says, I'm the above named person and my full details are recorded and retained by the police. I'm currently employed by Puig as its operations vice president. Puig is a worldwide company in both the beauty and fashion industry. One of the beauty leads Puig deals with its fragrances, including those sold under the brand Nina Ricci, which Puig wholly owns. Puig UK Limited is an affiliate of Puig. He says, I'm making this statement in addition to a letter I provided on the 27th of July 2018. We'll come to that letter in a moment, sir. Prior to me writing and signing that letter, I was shown a number of images of a small perfume bottle branded Nina Ricci Premier Jour perfume. The images I viewed were under police exhibit reference VN 551/10. VN 55110 is an exhibit reference for a number of photographs of the bottle, some of which we've seen before. So I'll go to those briefly. It's INQ 005075. You'll recall that photograph, the bottle only upright. And then we can see the reference number there on the screen. INQ 005077.
5077, yes.
That's the bottle on its side.
Oh, yes.
Then INQ 005079. That's the 3 Petri dishes. So you'll recall one of the witnesses explaining that the nozzle was put into a container in the first one, and then we see the nozzle, the applicator, sorry, and the bottle in those photographs. Also under this reference is INQ 004563, again a photograph we've seen before of the bottle and applicator in the same dish. Sir, VN 55110 also contains some further photographs which show the bottle with the Novichok in it, which your team have seen and which are available to you, but which are covered by a restriction order.
Yes.
If we could return to the statement, please, INQ 005821. Mr. Vivas goes on to say, I was shown further images of a perfume box labelled as Premier Jour Nina Ricci. This was under police exhibit reference VN 5213. VN 5213 refers to 4 inquiry references. Again, we'll bring them up quickly. That is INQ 004487. There are 3 pages to this. It's the box, the front or the top, and the second page, we should see the barcode. Thank you.
Is that also 4487, Miss Whitelaw?
This is also 4487, which comes within, you'll see at the top, sir, VN 5213.
Yes.
And then the third page of this is the other side, the reverse of the box. Thank you. And then also under the same exhibit reference is INQ 004672. That's the box with the ruler measurements.
Yeah.
And then INQ 004673, again.
Opened box.
Yes.
And ruler. Yes.
And then INQ 005126, box again with some ruler measurements.
Right.
So now we've seen the images which Mr. Vivas says he was shown before he wrote his letter of the 27th of July 2018. We'll go to that letter, which is INQ 006181. The header there says Antonio Puig, S.A., limited company, whose address is in Barcelona, Spain. It reads, "Dear Sirs, in view of the photos I received, I am certain that the product has been tampered with based on the following evidences. The actuator and the extension, the nose, are not used in the perfumery sector, but rather in the pharmaceutical sector."
And is that what we've been calling the applicator?
That's
Or not?
yes, it's the longer portion. We're going to see a picture of it in a minute, both in a pharmaceutical context and a perfume context. But it's the long protruding part.
Right.
He also says, the folding box, which must contain the product, seems correct, but as you can see, the bottle product and the pump, which includes the foreign part mentioned above, the actuator, will not fit. Therefore, this reaffirms my idea above, it's been tampered with.
Yeah.
He says, Premier Jour perfume is pale pink, and from the photos, I observe that it is yellow. Then he says the barcode is incorrect, as we have confirmed it on the website GS1, so we'll come to some more evidence about that in a moment. It's therefore obvious that certain parts of the product shown in the picture, as mentioned above, are not ours. However, we cannot be completely sure that this product does not contain parts which were produced by us or which were part of our range of products. The sizes registered in SAP, and that's I understand to be a software system that's used, for Premier Jour, produced and or marketed since 2008, are 4 mils, 15 mils, 30, 50, 60, 100, 150 and 200 mils. And we have not been able to find any record in our systems or files that refer to this particular format of this product. However, it needs to be considered that Premier Jour was marketed before 2008, and that in SAP we are only able to trace back up to 2008. Before that, we do not have available data. Our computer system of Nina Ricci, AS400, stopped working in 2003, and we began working with the X3 Paco Rabanne IT system. Thereafter, the X3 was abandoned at the end of 2007, as all companies in France began using SAP, and the data of the AS400 and of the X3 were conserved only until 2012. Please don't hesitate to contact us should you need further clarification. So that's the letter he refers to, writing in 2018. And returning to the statement, please, where we left off, page 1 of INQ 005821, if we could go down to the section that starts on Friday, the 2nd of February 2024, I was again shown the images of VN 55110 and VN 5213, so those are the images we've seen,
Yep.
before signing this statement, and I set out my observations on them below. The bottle and its components. The actuator and the extension, the nose of the bottle, within the images, VN 55110, are not used in the perfumery sector, but rather in the pharmaceutical sector. Puig does not use this type of component, nor to my knowledge is the component used in the wider perfume industry. My colleagues and I have also not been able to find any records in our systems or files that refer to a Premier Jour bottle of this size. However, Puig's computer system for Nina Ricci stock AS400 stopped working in 2003, and from then on we began working with the X3 Paco Rabanne IT system. Furthermore, the X3 was abandoned at the end of 2007, as all companies in France, being the location where Puig manufactured Nina Ricci fragrance products, began using SAP, and the data of AS400 and of the X3 systems were conserved until 2012. The stock history available in SAP therefore begins in 2008. The sizes of Premier Jour perfumes registered in SAP that have been produced and or marketed by Puig since 2008 are, and he gives again the measurements, 4, 15, 30, 50, 60, 100, 150 and 200 mils.
Now, all that, unless I've mistaken it, Ms Whitelaw, is confirming, as it were, word for word,
The letter.
the contents of the letter.
Yes, there are a few additional tiny points, but yes, he confirms this in statement form.
Yep.
And again, he goes on to say what he said in the letter, that because of this lack of historical traceability, I cannot be completely sure the bottle itself, without the actuator and extension, does not correspond to a Premier Jour perfume that may have been produced and sold before 2008. He also says, I have also provided a 2-page document exhibited as JV1, demonstrating the difference between the pharmaceutical nozzle and that of those used by Puig and more broadly within the perfumery industry. So if we could just look at that, please, JV1, which is INQ005822. And so you'll see that page 1 of that shows the difference between the perfume nozzle on the left and a pharmaceutical nozzle. It's a bit, because it's a pale white colour, perhaps a little bit difficult to see on the screen, but it's that long nozzle that we've seen.
Oh, yes, it's almost invisible. Yes, I see.
And then, so we can see the difference there between the perfume product and the pharmaceutical type product. And then page 2 has some more images. So on the left of perfume type nozzles versus sprays. Again, it's difficult to see because of the white background, but they're those longer nozzles. Perhaps if one looks at the yellow box of the pharmaceutical product, you can see the longer
The picture on the box. Yep.
Yes. Returning back to the statement, please, INQ 005821, page 2. We pick up with the heading, the liquid inside the bottle. He repeats, as he said in the letter, Premier Jour perfume is pale pink, and from the photos I observed that the liquid contained in the bottle is yellow. And so you have available to you those photographs. The folding box that contained the product seems correct, but I can see from the photos that the bottle and the pump that includes the foreign part mentioned above, the actuator, that's the pharmaceutical aspect, do not fit in the box. And you'll recall, so we heard evidence about this from Adam Wilson.
Yes.
Then he addresses the barcode. The barcode 3137370354923 on the box in VN 5213 is also incorrect. My colleagues and I conducted a search back in 2018 on the website of GS1, the entity in charge of the most widely used system of barcode standards in the world. Prior to me signing this statement, my colleagues and I have run that search again. I've provided a slide deck, which I exhibit as JV2, recording the results of that search and include a description from the GS1 website of its barcode system. So if we could go to JV2, which is INQ 005823. On page 1, this explains the barcode system, with GTIN being an umbrella family term for the GS1 global data structures that have different barcode numbers, and we'll see with the bullet points there that there are 12, 8, 13 or 14 digits in barcodes, and they correspond to where they might be found inside or outside North America, and the bottom one being to identify trade items at various packaging levels. And then if we could go to page 2 of this document, if you've had an opportunity to have a look at it. Would you like to go back to it?
No, go on, Ms Whitelaw. It'll need digesting in rather more detail at some stage.
Of course. So this is the barcode website system. This second page, if we can make it slightly bigger, has a search function on the website where it seems you can type in a number of a barcode, and then it'll bring up the results of the search. So on page 3 of this...
It's just barcodes on literally anything, is it?
Well, products that would be found on this website. He says in his statement that it's the largest system for barcoding in the world. So
yes, and so
I don't know if that
not necessarily perfumes at all. Could be food or
maybe other items,
bicycle clips or anything you like. Yes, I see. All right.
Don't know how extensive it is, but for these purposes, on page 3, as Mr. Vivas has said, he's conducted a search. So if we could make the left-hand side a bit bigger, we'll see the barcode number. And it looks as though he's plugged that in to the system search, and it comes up, it's slightly illegible, but it says invalid check of some sort at the bottom. And if we return to Mr.
Invalid something, resubmit the form, or yes.
Yes, it's the response in red indicating that the search was invalid.
Yep.
So if we bring up the statement again, please. INQ 005821. He's under the section on the barcode. He says, as the slides show, when entering the barcode of the concerned product, the system reports that the item has never existed, at least with a valid barcode, as it would appear as a search result even if the product was no longer being produced or sold. However, my team has been looking again into this matter and has reported to me that the barcode is not correct according to the GTIN coding system. The GTIN coding system is a family of GS1 data structures.
Right.
Specifically, the last figure is a control digit, and the digit 3 that appears in this example does not correspond to the prior series of numbers. Therefore, since the barcode is generated by each company following the defined procedure of GTIN, I cannot rule out the possibility that the barcode is one from a real product manufactured by Puig, having been generated or printed incorrectly at the time.
So let me just see if I'm following that, Ms. Whitelaw. I'm quite sure you are. It's the wrong. The number, when you type it into the search box, is returned never existed, and the format is wrong.
Yes, but
right?
yes, that's right, and he's not excluding the possibility that there's been an error, but it's either an error or a forgery, it seems.
Quite. If it's been printed, it's a misprint. Right.
He goes on to say there's a heading sales in 2018. Nina Ricci Premier Jour was sold in both Russia and UK in 2018. I am aware that police were provided with a copy of a table showing Premier Jour sales from 2009 to 2018, albeit the data for 2018 showed sales data available up to July of that year, being the date the information was obtained. And he refers to a previous exhibit reference. My team has rerun a search on our systems for sales in Russia and the UK to confirm the total figures for 2018. I confirm the total sales were as follows. Russia, and we see 44326 units, and UK 40021 units.
Yes.
And he indicates a willingness to provide evidence. We have adduced his evidence today, and that is the evidence that we have from Mr. Vivas in relation to his inquiries into the bottle and packaging.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. O'Connor.
So we will now hear oral evidence from Mr. Jonathan Allen.
Thank you.
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Most people are finding it convenient to sit, and that's where the microphones are, so please do that.
Thank you.
Could you give us your full name, please?
Jonathan Guy Allen.
Mr. Allen, thank you for coming to give evidence this morning. You are, is this right, a senior official in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office?
Yes, that's right.
We'll come back in a moment to hear a little more about the detail of your role. Mr. Allen, it's right, isn't it, that since the Skripal poisoning on the 3rd of March 2014, the UK government has made a series of public statements about responsibility, in particular Russian state responsibility for the Skripal poisoning.
Yes.
And you are here this morning to answer questions about those statements, as well as providing the most updated UK government assessment.
Yes, I am.
And you will also, to the extent you're able to do that, to do so in open, explain the evidential basis for those conclusions.
Yes.
Thank you.
If I might, sir, just start by saying that I'm aware that I'm going to give a lot of evidence today about geopolitics, about state matters. But at the heart of this is Dawn Sturgess, her children, her family and friends, and those who mourn her. And I just want to say how very sorry I am for her death.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Allen, you have provided the inquiry with a witness statement that is dated the 9th of August of this year. Perhaps we could have it up on screen, please. It's INQ 005938. That is the first page of your statement, Mr. Allen. If we could just go on to the last page, please. It's page 9. You'll see, Mr. Allen, that your signature has been concealed by a redaction. Is that your statement?
Yes, it is.
And have you had a chance to review it before giving evidence this morning?
Yes, I have.
And are the contents of that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. So may we please adduce the statement of evidence in the normal way?
Yes, please. Mr. Allen, have you got bits of it may turn up on the screen from time to time, and I'm sure you're familiar with it anyway. Have you actually got a hard copy in case you need it?
I do, sir. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, use it if you need to as a refreshment or whatever. But what matters is what you tell me today.
Thank you, sir.
So I've just been had my attention drawn to the fact that at the very start of my questions I incorrectly referred to the Skripal poisoning as having taken place in March 2014. I'm sorry if that put Mr. Allen
I'm
off.
afraid I didn't even notice.
It was, of course, 2018.
2018.
Mr. Allen, I said I would come back to your career in the Foreign Office, and for those purposes, could we go to page 1 of your statement, please? And at paragraph 1 of that statement, you provide some information about the role that you fulfil at the moment. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
We can see that you are currently the Director General for Defence and Intelligence within the Foreign Office. You list your responsibilities in that post at paragraph 1. I'm not going to read them all out. But you say that you are His Majesty's Government's senior responsible owner for Russia, reporting to the National Security Advisor, and also that the cross-government units, the HMG cross-government unit on Russia, or the Russia unit, reports to you. Can you, that's no doubt perfectly understandable to those within the government machine, but could you explain a little bit more about what those roles entail?
Certainly. So, as SRO for Russia, when we're dealing with Russia strategy, the government strategy towards Russia, I bring together all government departments, including representatives of the agencies as well, to ensure that we're all essentially using all of our levers, all of our information, all of our understanding is pointing in the same direction, and we're being coherent. And then where there are situations where something unexpected arises, what you might call a crisis of some sort, then I will also chair that sort of grouping to work out what our collective response should be and how we're going to take it forward.
Thank you.
But I act not as the Foreign Office's DG, but as government's senior official.
Because it's cross-departmental.
Indeed. And so there is no question of who is in control or anything like that.
Right.
Just to fill in a little more of the history of your career, Mr. Allen, I think it's right to say that you joined the Foreign Office in 1997.
Yes.
And subsequently you've undertaken a range of diplomatic roles, many of which have included a national security dimension.
Yes, I've worked in national security, both in the FCDO and other departments.
And is it right that in March 2018 you were the UK ambassador and deputy permanent representative to the United Nations Security Council in New York?
Yes, to the United Nations as a whole in New York, and I was chargé d'affaires at that time.
Yes, and is that because, we'll come to see in a moment, of course, March 2018, the date of the Skripal poisoning, but was there, as it were, a vacancy in the number one slot? Is that why?
A brief vacancy, that's right.
Yes. The reason that, obviously the date is significant, but the reason that it is of some extra significance is that you made, did you not, a statement to the Security Council about the Skripal attack on the 14th of March 2018.
Yes, I did.
Perhaps if we could call, there is a note of that statement. If we could just have a look at it, please. It's INQ 003053. So a government, a publication of your statement. We can see, if we look towards the bottom of the text there, it was delivered on the 14th of March of that year. And then if we could just go on through the document, please. It's only a few pages long. On page 2, there's a photograph of you in that familiar place, at that desk, no doubt, delivering this statement. And then the text of the statement appears starting immediately below the photograph. And then if we could just look onto the next page and the page after, we will come back to look at some of the detail of that statement. That is what that is. And we will note the date, so the 14th of March, a week and a half after the poisoning. Was this address that you made one of a sequence of public statements made by the UK government at around that time?
Yes.
We've seen something of the Prime Minister's statements in Parliament, and we will look shortly at Sir Mark Sedwell's letter, which came a little bit later. Can you just give us a little bit of context to what those statements were, what they were designed to achieve?
Certainly. So if I remember correctly, the then Prime Minister Theresa May made a statement to Parliament, I think on the 12th of March, which was after the identification of the substance that had been used to carry out the poisoning, being Novichok. And she said there that there were broadly two possibilities. One was that the Russian state had done this deliberately, and one was that it had lost control of some of its stocks of nerve agent. And she said that the Foreign Secretary had been summoned the Russian ambassador to ask which it was, and to also ask Russia to declare its stocks. And on the 14th of March, following no reply from the Russians, the Prime Minister then set out her belief that this was a deliberate act by the Russian state, set out some consequences for it. And then my statement, coming at, I think, 3 p.m. New York time, so probably 8 p.m. UK time, was the first of the international statements on the issue, as opposed to domestic to Parliament.
I see. Yes, thank you. Well, as I say, we will come back to some of the detail of those various statements. But finally, by way of introduction, I wonder if we could go back to your witness statement, please. So that's INQ 005938. And if we could look at page 2. And paragraph 9, which is at the bottom of the page. At the beginning of that paragraph, you refer, as we've already mentioned, to the existing statements and the fact that you will be able to provide an updated assessment today. But you go on, and I'm now looking 4 or 5 lines down, to say that you emphasise there are some matters that you cannot address in a public forum on behalf of HMG. The reasons for that, you say, will no doubt be obvious, but they ultimately derive from the first duty of government, which is to protect the national security of its citizens. In essence, Mr. Allen, are you saying there that there is some detail about these matters that cannot be addressed in a public forum?
Yes, I am.
Can you confirm to us that all relevant detail has been provided to the inquiry but that as a result of restriction orders made by the chair, the consequence of those is that some detail will have to be dealt with in closed session rather than open session.
Yeah, I understand that's the case, yes.
And you refer to the government's duty to protect national security. Just to be clear, the restriction orders in question were made, were they not, on the basis that to make open disclosure of this type of information would harm national security?
Yes.
Yes. I've used the term assessment, the HMG assessments about these matters, more than once. And as we go through your statement, is this right? There will be various places where really the limit of what you're able to do in this open session is to state HMG's assessment with the supporting evidence and analysis remaining enclosed.
That's right, yes.
Right. Let's go on then, if we can, and go back. We've already touched on it, but go back to those early public statements made by HMG after the poisoning in March 2018. In fact, it's the page of the statement we're already on. If we could go back to it, page 2 of your own statement. We see further up that page, at paragraph 6, you refer to the Prime Minister's statement dated the 12th of March. I think you might have said it was the 13th, but it's the 12th of March. Was that the statement in Parliament to which you've referred, where the Prime Minister identified, or having earlier posed those two alternative explanations, either that the Russian government had deliberately poisoned the Skripals or that it had lost control of its own supplies of the poison? Was it this statement referred to in paragraph 6 where the Prime Minister asserted her conclusion that it was in fact the first of those alternatives?
I believe there were two moments, the 12th and the 14th. And I think this one of the 12th was the first statement to Parliament, which had the option that Russia could have lost control of its stocks. And it was on the 14th, failing any satisfactory response, that HMG concluded that Russia was acting deliberately.
I see. Well, let's not worry about the dates. It's probably my mistake. But that's the sequence.
That's the sequence.
There was, as it were, an invitation to Russia to clarify the situation. And was that taken up?
Well, Russia was asked to clarify within 24 hours and failed to do so.
And that then led, on your memory, to a subsequent statement on the 14th by the Prime Minister.
That's right.
And then...
In which case, Mr. Ryan, it's a detail, but I'd better be sure about it. Paragraph 6 of your statement rather telescopes the two statements. Is that right?
Well,
Well, yes, it simply sets out the fact that we considered Russia was highly likely. We obviously then, the Prime Minister then went on to give further detail 2 days later when she was confirmed.
All right. Thank you.
But one thing we do know is that your New York statement, which we just looked at, came 2 days later on the 14th.
Indeed.
Yep.
And that was indeed after the time when Russia had been given an opportunity to clarify the situation.
Yes, indeed.
And of course, all of this was a month or so before the letter that we will come to look at from Sir Mark Sedwill in April.
That's right.
We will look at the letter in a moment. But is it right that that letter provided more detail and more analysis in support of the same basic proposition?
Yes.
Before we do come to the letter, can you help us with a little bit more context? Was there as it were, a strategy being pursued by the government in making these various statements?
So, first thing I would say, I wasn't there at the time, as you know, I was in New York, but this is my understanding from looking into all of this. I think there was indeed a strategy to move internationally, and I think there were a few reasons for that. Do you want me to come on to those now? So first of all, if I put it this way, I think we learnt from the Litvinenko experience, in which Russia played all sorts of games, dragged its feet, played with both the police investigation and ultimately the inquiry, pretending that it was going to cooperate and never doing so. So there was absolute clarity from the start we were not going to let Russia string this out in the same way. I think the second reason for internationalising or going on to this international strategy was really to sort of build quickly a coalition of countries who could both understand the risk and then take steps themselves to protect their own countries, but also could ultimately act together to deter and degrade Russia's ability to do this in future.
Thank you, and we'll come back in perhaps later this morning to talk a little more about the Russian response itself, and to which the statements you've just described were a response. May we come now to the Sedwell letter itself, and let's go, please, to INQ 003070. So we will note then that this is the 13th of April, so almost exactly a month from those statements in the House of Commons and your own New York statement that we were just addressing.
Yes.
The addressee is Mr. Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO. Was there a particular significance in him being the person to whom this letter was written, or was it a sort of convenient recipient to whom one could write what was essentially a public document?
Well, I think the significance is that the United Kingdom government had concluded that the Russian state had carried out an attack using a military-grade nerve agent on the United Kingdom. The place you would naturally go to discuss that with your allies is NATO, which is the organisation built for the collective defence of the UK and its allies. I believe, I know from the end, Mark Sedwell says he sent a similar letter to the European Union, which then picks up some of the non-NATO Western partners.
Yeah, and in fact we see, at the very beginning of the letter, it appears that Mark Sedwell had briefed the North Atlantic Council on the 15th of March, so within a day or so of those earlier statements that we've just been looking at.
Yes, that's right, yes.
And then just looking at the second paragraph of the letter, if we scroll down, there is a reference to a different international organisation, the OPCW. Now, we've heard some evidence already about that organisation and about the visits it made, the testing and so on, and we'll look very briefly at one of its reports in a moment. But again, by way of context and from the Foreign Office position, what was the significance of the OPCW and its involvement in these matters at this time?
Right. So the OPCW is the global body, the only global body that exists for the prohibition of chemical weapons. It's what we call a universal body, so all member states of the United Nations are members of it, and it imposes commitments and conditions on those who are states party. And in this particular instance, it is the preeminent professional, technical, independent source of advice and analysis. And so what it, as you can see, it goes on about the report being published. The OPCW's word, therefore, is of particular significance internationally because it is, sort of the preeminent organisation on such matters.
Yeah, and we can see from paragraph 2, just picking up the chronology, that it was the day before Mark Sedwell wrote this letter that the OPCW had published the first of its visit reports relating to the UK and Salisbury and so on. We could perhaps just remind ourselves briefly, we have looked at this document before, but if we could go to INQ 002995, please. Thank you. We'll see just on this first page at the top right the date, the 12th of April, so it is indeed the day before the Sedwell letter. We're, I think, familiar with the content and the context of the document. It's the visit that was made shortly after the Skripal poisonings, the taking of samples and so on. We've heard from MK26 who briefed the visiting team. If we could go over to the second page, please, just remind ourselves that paragraphs 10 and 11, perhaps we could enlarge those paragraphs. The conclusions stated in that report, the results of the analysis of the environmental and biomedical samples confirm the findings of the United Kingdom relating to the identity of the toxic chemical that was used in Salisbury. We've heard about this being the public report. They don't actually name the chemical, but we know that the UK had identified Novichok and had told the visitors that that was the chemical they believed was involved. And then also, of some significance, the analysis of the chemical being of high purity. We've heard the evidence of the significance of that too. So that's that's the part of the context for the Sedwell letter.
Yes, indeed.
If we could go back to it, please. So it's INQ 003070. The sort of headline assessment is at the very bottom of the first page. We see there the assessment of it being highly likely that the Russian state was responsible for the Salisbury attack. Just pausing there, an assessment identical to the one which had been in play a month earlier in your address to the Security Council and in the Prime Minister's statement to Parliament.
Yes, that's right.
But is this right? What was new about this letter was the sentence that followed and then the further explanation given. Is that right?
Yes, indeed.
So Mark Sedwell goes further and provides some sort of analysis, and as we will see, a certain amount of evidence in support of that analysis by reference to what I've described as the technical means, operation experience, and the motive on the part of the Russians.
Yes.
And if we could just go on in the letter, just to remind ourselves briefly, we will come to each of those in turn, but if we go to page 2, we see first the technical means. In essence, this refers to the understanding of the Russian chemical weapons program, in particular relating to Novichok. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, that's right.
Well, the paragraph says it's a Novichok.
Yes.
Well, I'm sorry, but if we could read on, is it then followed in the second and third paragraph by reference to the Russian program?
Yes, it is, yes.
Yeah.
And then if we carry on down, the second limb of the analysis is at the bottom of the page, the operational experience. In summary, Mr. Allen, what is being described here?
Indeed, yes.
And
What's being described is the Russian state's involvement in the Litvinenko killing, and obviously as a reference to other state-sponsored assassinations.
and then if we will come back to these points, as I say. If we could go on to the next page, and the third and final limb of the assessment, it says the motive. And I think we can see underneath that paragraph is the start of the conclusion. So the third limb of the analysis is just that paragraph. Is that fair, Mr. Allen?
That's right. And then I think it follows there is no plausible alternative explanation, which is also key.
Well, as I say, we will come back to those matters, but that is the structure of the Sedwell letter and the analysis that it contains.
That's right.
So if we could start, please, with the issue of in fact, what was the first of those limbs, what was described in the Sedwell letter as the technical means, the Russian nerve agent program. This is addressed in your statement, and if we may, we'll go back to it. So it's INQ 005938, paragraph 14, at the bottom of page 3. And you refer here, Mr. Allen, and we have heard from other witnesses already about the understanding of this program, which commenced, is this right, in the Soviet Union?
That's right, yes.
But you describe it being inherited by the Russian Federation after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
And then, as we can see in your statement, you refer to the identification of Novichok, both by DSTL and OPCW.
Yes.
And then, I think that's all you say in your statement about this, but if we could go back, in fact, to those paragraphs we were just looking at in the Sedwill letter, so INQ 003070. And I'm now looking at the second paragraph that's on the screen. Again, we've heard something about the open source understanding of the Foliant program, what dissident scientists, Mitsianov and others, have said openly about this program, and including the production of Novichok. Is there any more that you can add than what's in that paragraph about the understanding of that program?
There's nothing more I can add from, in terms of the scientists, etc., those who are working the program. I think it speaks for itself.
If we could just look at a witness statement that's been prepared by a Ministry of Defence official, please. That's Adrian Bird. It's that the INQ number is INQ 006104. We see here, Mr. Bird, paragraph 1, describes himself as the Director General for Defence Intelligence, presumably a colleague who you know.
Yes, indeed.
And at page 2 of his statement, paragraph 10, he states that the existence of Novichok agents first became known through limited open source articles in the 1990s. Is that the information we've just been discussing?
Yes.
But he goes on, subsequent to those, DI, and I think that's Defence Intelligence, had access to further classified intelligence on these agents. Is that right, that there is further classified understanding of this matters beyond what we hear in the open sources?
I would take it as read, if that's what Adrian Bird has said, that is the case.
Thank you. If I could go back to the Sedwill letter, please. So that's INQ 003070, page 2. If we could now go down to the third paragraph, so the one that begins Russia's chemical weapons programme. I wanted to ask you about a couple of sentences towards the end of that paragraph. No, sorry. In fact, to start with the paragraph above, you see the word foliant, Mr. Allen.
Yes.
So just after that, there's a sentence which says, it is highly likely that Novichoks were developed to prevent detection by the West and to circumvent international chemical weapons controls. Are you able to expand on what that assessment means and how we're to understand it?
I'm afraid I personally don't have sort of the knowledge on that particular sentence. Again, I've seen nothing in my preparation for this that tells me that suggests any part of what Mark Sedwill's letter said has been subsequently, our view is subsequently changed upon, so I believe it to be true.
And no doubt that goes for the law. I won't ask you to about the final two sentences in that case beyond, is it right that what is said there, in other words, the Russian state has previously produced Novichoks, still be capable of doing so, and is understood as of April 2018 to have produced and stockpiled small quantities of Novichoks within the decade before that? Does that remain HMG's assessment?
That remains HMG's assessment, noting, of course, that we believe Novichoks were used in this case and were subsequently used in 2020 against Mr. Navalny. So there is an assumption, therefore, of stockpiling.
Yes, thank you. Well, and we'll come to his case in due course. Again, then, I will let me ask you. Now, I would like to go to the paragraph below that. That the sentence at the end of that paragraph is something about which we have heard the assessment that it's unlikely that Novichoks could be made and deployed by non-state actors. This, as we may see, is something that you mentioned in your Security Council address. Is this something on which you can expand or not?
Well, I believe there's already been some evidence about the sorts of conditions that are required to make such a dangerous substance, to the effect that it's not capable of being made by a non-state actor. And the point I made, I believe, in my statement to the Security Council, and was also reinforced by the OPCW analysis, is that there was extremely high purity of the Novichok that was found in this Salisbury case, which indicates that it would need to be made in a highly sophisticated state-run laboratory.
Yeah. Sticking with Novichok, but just changing focus slightly towards the Chemical Weapons Convention itself and assessments made regarding that, I'd like to ask you about a different witness statement, but also produced from within the MOD. If we could go, please, to INQ 006103. This is a statement from someone called Rebecca Sagar. Again, is that someone who you know or a colleague?
Indeed, Rebecca works for me indirectly.
We can see from the second paragraph of her statement her role, which is the Deputy Director for Defence and International Security at the Foreign Office and Head of Counter-Proliferation and Arms, the Counter-Proliferation and Arms Control Centre.
Yes, that's right.
And if we cast our eyes up to paragraph 1, we can see that she has provided this statement to address quite a particular issue about whether the Russian Federation would have been in breach of international obligations to the extent it had stocks of undeclared Novichoks in 2018.
Yes.
So help us. Is this Proliferation Arms Control Centre, is this one of the parts of government that, as it were, feeds into your unit, or to which you has some form of relationship with the Russia unit?
It feeds into me in my role as Director General, Defence and Intelligence through the Directorate for Defence and International Security. And I think, as she is going on to say, perhaps, if I'm not jumping ahead, it's a joint unit. So it also encompasses colleagues from the MOD, and that enables us to make sure we're being properly joined up.
Yes. If we could go to page 2 of her statement, please. And Ms. Rowland, I'll ask you, clearly Ms. Sagar is expressing some relatively specialist views, and you will have to tell us the extent to which you are also a specialist in these matters or not. But at paragraph 7 of her statement, Ms. Sagar summarises, if you like, the effect of the Chemical Weapons Convention, and in particular, under Article 1, the undertaking on the parts of states parties essentially not to develop or produce chemical weapons, which includes, if we look at A, toxic chemicals and their precursors. Is that something within your knowledge?
Yes, it is.
And then, is it right that, building on that sort of fundamental duty, the Chemical Weapons Convention also contains duties on states parties to declare whether, in fact, they hold chemical weapons or not?
Yes, that's right, on accession.
Well, you say on accession. So, is it right that there was was there a sort of duty, a sort of initial duty on the part of states?
There was a.
Can you describe that?
Yes. So each state is obliged to declare whether it has owned or possessed chemical weapons, whether it still has any, and then to provide information about those in more detail to the OPCW.
So that's the sort of duty
Yeah,
at the outset.
that's right.
And is there then an...
Well, and then clearly the Chemical Weapons Convention exists. It's a key plank of the international counter-proliferation architecture. It's actually one of the, I think, more successful planks. And it is, there is an absolute prohibition on the use of chemical weapons. I mean, blanket. So any state that is a party to this, and all member states of the United Nations are, may not acquire, possess, develop, and still less use chemical weapons lawfully.
Is it a continuing duty?
Yes.
It says so somewhere, does it?
Well, so that was...
I think in para 7 in front of you, sir, it says undertakes never under any circumstances.
I follow.
So
And just to pick up on that, so do we see paragraph 8, if we can look down towards the bottom of the page, I think, is this right, Mr. Allen? Ms. Sagar is describing that
yes,
initial duty on, I think the words you used were on accession. But then if we go over the page to paragraph 9, does she there refer to a different part of the convention, which I think was maybe what the chair had in mind by a continuing duty on parties to notify the OPCW if things change?
yes, she does.
Thank you.
And what was the position regarding Russia and its accession to the treaty, and what declarations it did or didn't make?
When Russia acceded to the convention, I see Rebecca has said on the 5th of November 1997, in its initial declarations, it did not include Novichok's.
And you're looking at paragraph 10. Let's read on. Did it declare other chemical weapons that it held?
Yes, it did, yes.
And what, in consequence of joining the convention, what was required of it having declared those weapons?
So it was required to destroy them in a way that was verifiable. I believe the timeline was 10 years, extendable by a further 5. And indeed, it took it 20 years, as you'll see from that paragraph 10. So that was the destruction, though, only of the stocks that it had declared to the OPCW. Novichok not having been declared, well, we would say was obviously not destroyed.
And bearing those sort of stages of understanding in mind and looking at paragraph 11, Ms. Sagar asserts Russia did hold stocks of Novichoks intended for use as a chemical weapon in 2018, and we've covered that, including the substance used to poison the Skripals, and she goes on, Russia was therefore in breach of some or all of the above obligations as a state party to the Chemical Weapons Convention. Is that an assessment you share?
Absolutely, yes.
And in fact, we can look briefly, is this a matter that you raised publicly in that statement you made in New York in 2018?
Yes, I did.
If we go back to it, please, it's INQ 003053. If we can go within the text this time of your statement to, it's the bottom of page 3, and we'll need to go to the top of page 4. And in the very bottom paragraph, we can see, are you here? Essentially covering the ground we've just discussed. You refer to the duty on states party to verifiably destroy weapons held. Is that right?
Yes.
And you mentioned a moment ago the period with, as it were, an extension available. What are you... It appears that you're making a criticism in that final sentence at the bottom of page 3. What is it?
Well, simply that it took Russia a very long time to get round to fully and verifiably destroying its declared stockpile.
Yeah. And so then if we read on to the next paragraph, which is at the top of page 4, are you essentially making the point we've covered, which is that there was no declaration of Novichok no development facilities declared, which is in contrast to your understanding of what the true position was.
Indeed, that's right, yes.
Thank you. Could we go now to a different document, which is one I know you're aware of because you refer to it in your witnessing? It's the what we've been describing as the Russian embassy document. And I'll come back a little later to ask you for your sort of more rounded views on this document. But may I just ask you about one passage within it for the moment? So the document is 004576, and if we can go to page 21, please. Well, we see there about halfway down, just at the bottom of the passage on the screen, the assertion that it's safe to say that any modern chemical laboratory is capable of synthesizing Novichok, in contrast to what we've said about, what you have said about it being a state, really only something that can be done at the state level. Is there anything that you can add to this debate, Mr. Allen?
I don't think that is a view that is shared in the scientific community or in the OPCW.
All right.
As far as you know, is it something which has been asserted either by Mr. Mirzyanov or by the other publications of American, Czech, Italian, etc. researchers?
I haven't read those in detail, sir, so I couldn't say.
Let me come back to, I'm sorry, if we can go back to page 19, this is the passage which picks up on the OPCW. And that the sort of large paragraph starting, yet all production. And you see in bold there, in September 2017, the OPCW certified the full destruction of Russia's chemical weapons. I think that's the date on which you agree. It's the date we've just been looking at.
Yes.
But the point is made in the sentence that follows, no doubt mindful of the assertions we've just been discussing. If the UK had information of Russia producing military-grade chemical agents in contravention of its obligations, one would expect the UK to raise the issue in 2017. They did not. It's right, I think, that at least prior to the Salisbury poisoning, the UK government did not say anything publicly about its assessment that Russia was holding Novichoks. First of all, let me ask you this. Is there any, we've looked at various parts of the Chemical Weapons Convention. Is there anything in the Chemical Weapons Convention itself requiring states to alert the international community to possible breaches on the part of other states?
Could I just say on the question of whether the UK had or hadn't raised this, as part of my preparation for today, I read a document which I believe was submitted to the, I think is submitted to the inquiry, which was a statement by Peter Wilson, the then permanent representative to the OPCW on the 18th of April, in which he notes and says publicly that the UK government raised with Russian Federation in 2000 the absence of Novichoks from the declaration.
Sorry. Just let me catch up, Mr. Allen. In 2000, he, according to Mr. Wilson, who was speaking in 2018...
He was speaking in 2018.
Or writing, as the case may be, said publicly that in 2000 the UK had raised with Russia?
Had raised with the Russian Federation the fact that they had not included Novichok in their declaration.
Right.
And that he said that the Russian side had indicated that there was nothing to declare.
Well, thank you. That's a very helpful explanation. And just to go back to your answer, you referred to Peter Wilson, who was the UK permanent representative to the OPCW.
That's right.
And would that therefore be, in fact, the appropriate avenue for the UK government to make that type of representation?
Yes, that's the right body and he was the right person. I just wanted to make sure I'd been open about the fact that he said that there had indeed been such a representation in the past. I must say I'm not aware of the detail of it.
Right. So that, at least that's an important factual point for us to bear in mind. We do have evidence that, on the face of it, that there was at least some sort of representation within the OPCW arena in or around 2000.
In the past, yeah.
But is there more to be said? I mean, is there in fact a requirement on governments to call out other governments?
There's no such requirement that I'm aware of. No.
Are we essentially talking about the diplomatic sphere?
Yes, indeed.
Well, there's not a treaty obligation to call out breach. It's a matter for judgment.
The obligations are on the states parties not to use.
Quite.
There are opportunities and rights within the convention to challenge, but it is not an obligation to challenge.
Thank you.
I'd like, Mr. Allen, to move on to a different issue and a different part of your witness statement, and it's a series of issues relating to the GRU, the government's assessment about the GRU's role in the Skripal case. And if we could go then back to your witness statement, so it's INQ 005938, page 4, starting at paragraph 15. And we see there, you have stated HMG's view that the GRU was responsible for carrying out the Skripal poisoning. You refer to the 3 individuals who we've been describing as Petrov, Bosharov and Fedotov, but noting the analysis relating to those being aliases, and also their membership of GRU Unit 29155. And as I'm sure you're aware, all of those matters are matters on which we have now heard quite detailed evidence from Commander Murphy relating to the police investigation, evidence which has a lot to say about those individuals and about that unit of the GRU. But is it right, and we'll come to the following paragraphs of your statement, but in summary, the HMG has broader assessments to make about the activity of the GRU and its involvement in this case?
Yes.
In paragraph 16, you refer to that part of the Sedwill letter which stated that HMG had information indicating Russian intelligence service interest in the Skripals dating back at least as far as 2013, where email accounts belonging to Yulia Skripal were targeted by GRU cyber specialists. Is there anything more you can say about that piece of information which was referred to in the Sedwill letter in April 2018?
I think the important point about that is it shows a length of interest in the Skripals, and therefore, to me, suggests this is not explicable as a rogue operation or just one cell of the GRU taking action.
In paragraph 17, you provide some information about, now we've moved forward, haven't we, and we're talking about the immediate aftermath of the Skripal poisoning, about a slightly different sort of GRU activity, which in fact we haven't heard evidence about so far. So can you explain what this information is and how you think it's relevant?
Certainly. So as I say in my statement, the Dutch intervened in the midst of an operation by the GRU, a different unit of the GRU, 26165, which is a technical operations unit, who were seeking to hack into the computer systems of the OPCW in The Hague. The Dutch, if I may say, caught them red-handed with the equipment in the back of a car. They were able to get information from telephone devices that were in the possession of the individuals, and they found documentary evidence as well, including in one case, one of the individuals had a taxi receipt from outside GRU headquarters to Moscow airport on the day their group had left to go to the Netherlands. And so putting all that together, we're able quite quickly to identify this as a GRU group. I think, again, the reason it's significant is that they were seeking to hack into the OPCW, I would say, because at that time, the OPCW was testing the blood and testing for Novichok. And they clearly wanted to know what people were finding and find out if there was any information I would suggest that we had given them. And I think the other relevant factor here is this is a different unit of the GRU. So again, this is not a rogue operation. This is a properly combined operation which would have required a level of coordination and, I would say, senior authorisation.
Yes, and thank you for that. Of course, on the date, I won't go back to it, but as you say, we will recall that April was exactly the time that the visit took place, and then the analysis and that public notice that we saw. But if we could, we have paragraphs 18 and 19 on the screen.
Forgive me, Mr. O'Connor. The information in 17 about what the Dutch found, is that derived from some public statement?
There were public statements, and there's also a PowerPoint presentation that the Dutch military intelligence released publicly with information about devices, where they were located to in Moscow, a copy of the taxi receipt with a helpful map. I don't know if that's been submitted to the inquiry.
That's enough. I just wanted to know where it came from. Thank you very much.
You've made the point, Mr. Allen, that this is therefore a different part of the GRU, which tends to it tends to argue against any idea that this might have been a sort of unilateral operation on the part of 29155. And I think you've also mentioned the point which is contained within paragraph 19 of your statement. It allows an assessment to be made about the level within the GRU of understanding and indeed authorisation of these activities. What is that assessment?
Well, it is that this was an operation in the planning for some time, and that by using different units, it would have been authorised at the top of the organisation and involved a certain amount of coordination between units that operate in different, can I say, management streams, if you like.
Can I just, there's one part of paragraph 17 that you didn't mention, I haven't asked you about. You've mentioned the discovery by the Dutch military intelligence about the attempt to try and hack into the OPCW headquarters in The Hague. Just look at the last sentence in brackets at the end of paragraph 17. That appears to refer to a slightly different factual matter. Just help us with that.
Yes, I believe it was the same information that was provided by the Dutch authorities showed attempts to hack into a separate laboratory, one of the ones the OPCW used.
I see.
Well, yes, I think we've heard that they have a number of participating laboratories in different countries.
That's right, yes, sir.
Yeah.
So I'm about to move on to a different topic. I wonder if that would be a convenient moment to
Yes,
have a
it's
short break.
convenient to you, Mr. Allen. We get a break, please, until past. You're in the middle of your evidence. Keep your own counsel until you come back.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Past, please.
Mr. Allen, before the break, we were discussing your assessments relating to the GRU's sort of role in the attack and those sort of wider points that you were drawing out. I'd just like to touch on a few other issues relating to the GRU that emerged both from your statement and also from the Sedwell letter. If we can go to the letter first, please. So it's INQ 003070, and it's page 2. You'll recall that when we just had a sort of overview of the letter and we looked at those 3 limbs of the analysis in the Sedwell letter, the second of those, the bottom of the page, was operational experience. And I think you summarised the points being made there as the Litvinenko case and other alleged assassinations. Can you just expand for us on HMG's assessment regarding the significance of the Litvinenko case, first of all, to your assessments relating to the Skripal poisoning?
Yes, just so I can understand, you put that in the context of GRU.
Yes, well, you're right. We'll come back to that. I mean, in fact, of course, that was not understood to be a GRU.
Indeed. So,
can you explain what your understanding of the Litvinenko case is and how it relates to your understanding of the Skripal case?
sure, certainly. So there are obviously some similarities between the two, some differences as well. But in both cases, sticking to the Litvinenko case, Litvinenko was a prominent opponent of the Russian government and particularly of President Putin. He had worked for the FSB in Russia in the past, and the inquiry into his death found that the 2 men who had poisoned him face to face were directed by someone else that was not of their own volition. And as you see here, that Sir Robert Owen found there was a strong probability that it was the FSB who directed it, and indeed that President Putin probably approved it. So that was an example of Russian security agencies travelling outside of Russia to the UK in this instance, and carrying out an attack with a very unusual murder weapon, which again I think is a similarity to this case. Polonium-210, a radioactive material, not something that is at all straightforward to obtain, and something that would be a very public demonstration of the Russian state's action against those it deems to be traitors. So they were the similarities I'd pick out.
If we could just stick with Litvinenko for the moment, but
Yes.
go back to your witness statement, please. So that's INQ 005938, and towards the end of your statement at page 8, you can see there at the bottom half of the page there is a section headed "The Poisoning of
Yes.
Alexander Litvinenko," and we've really covered the points you again recite. You refer to the findings of Sir Robert Owen at paragraph 36, but then at paragraph 37 you refer to the way in which one of the individuals, Andrei Lugovoy, was treated. What is there to say about that?
It's a very, to my mind, that is Lugovoy was given this honour for service to the motherland. The timing coincides with the inquiry hearings, and I think it's both what you might call a tacit acknowledgement of this man's acts, as well as a very clear dismissal of the UK's proceedings.
I mean, we'll come to talk about the Russian response to the Skripal poisonings and the allegations, if we call them that, made by the UK government. But it's right, isn't it, that the Russian government denied involvement in the Litvinenko killing?
It did, yes.
But at the same time, and this is the point you're making, honoured one of the individuals who was accused of having undertaken it.
Yes, quite.
And so is that an example of sort of mixed messages or trying to, I mean, you choose your words, but is this the promotion of sort of contrasting narratives, is that something that that appeared again in 2018?
I think this is Russian disinformation always starts with denial. So there's the denial throughout, and President Putin would simultaneously here, I think, be denying any involvement while simultaneously telling the individual he's done a great job. And I think that's the mixed message he wants to send. He wants to send a message on the one hand, this wasn't ours, and on the other hand, we look after our own, this person's done well, traitors to the motherland should be eliminated. That's the mixed message I think you're seeing.
Yeah.
I'd like to move on.
Are you moving on from Litvinenko?
I was, so yes.
I just wanted to pick up something that I think you said, Mr. Allen. I wasn't sure I've got it right. That operation, I think you said, wasn't regarded, at any rate, by analysts in the UK as a GRU operation.
No, so it was the FSB.
Quite. Entirely separate organisations?
Yes.
Always operating in harmony or not?
There is quite often tension between the organisations in the Russian state security services. They do not cooperate well, if at all. I think the FSB and the SVR, the external agency, both rather also look down on the GRU and see it as rather reckless and sometimes a little unprofessional.
Thank you. And does that go back, that relationship or uneasy relationship, whichever it might be, does it go back to pre-Russian Soviet days?
I think so, yes, sir.
Which of them is the precursor of the GRU? Sorry, which of them is the successor to the KGB?
The FSB is the
That's what I
successor of the
thought.
KGB.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
What about the SVR? Was that also part of the old KGB?
No, the SVR has always been an independent, international-facing intelligence service.
Okay, thank you. And just sticking with that point raised by the chair, if we could have your statement back up on screen. It's there if we need to see it, but is it right, as well as being an HMG assessment, that Litvinenko was an FSB operation, that was also the finding of Sir Robert Owen? We can see at paragraph 36 of your statement in the quote, Sir Robert's findings were that this was an operation undertaken by the FSB with the approval of Mr. Patrushev, who was then the head of the FSB.
Yes, that's right. And if I may, again, it's about the murder weapon, I think, that helps that. It's inconceivable that private individuals could get hold of deeply dangerous radioactive material that would have to come from a reactor.
I was going to move on. It's called, with the Litvinenko case, one is obviously looking at a historic case and seeing what connections can be drawn with the Skripal poisoning that happened some years later. If we cast our eyes down to the bottom of this page of your statement that's on screen now, we see the next subheading is the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, which of course happened after 2018. Can you then help us with what you say about that and how it informs your assessments relating to Mr. Skripal?
Yes. I think it's particularly relevant because it's the use of the same substance, Novichok, although in this case it is within the Russian state, so it's not an expeditionary operation. So Mr. Navalny fell ill, was poisoned, was treated first in Russia, which is significant because the Russian state ran tests on him, and they subsequently said that they had not found any trace of Novichok or poison. They indeed said that to the European Court of Human Rights at the case that was brought there. but at no point did the Russian state ever produce any of the forensic tests or any reports. It simply asserted it as a fact. Mr. Navalny was moved while in a coma to Germany, where he was tested both by the German authorities and by the OPCW again. And they found Novichok was present in his blood. And so, again, it is demonstrate. I mean, it is absolutely inconceivable that any actor other than the Russian state could have used Novichok in Russia against a prominent opposition figure. So again, I think it shows Russia's willingness to use this poison, this nerve agent, when it wishes to eradicate a member of someone who is an opposition figure.
As with Litvinenko, at least as far as I understand it, looking at public statements and so on, HMG's assessment is that the action against Navalny was taken by the FSB.
That's right.
So we have two cases, both of them undertaken, so it appears, by the FSB. Does that, the fact that they are both FSB cases, does that have any influence on your assessment in this case about the GRU?
It doesn't. I would note that it may be relevant that Mr. Litvinenko was a former FSB officer who was seen as a traitor, and the FSB took action against him, murdered him. Mr. Skripal is a former GRU officer, convicted of treason. Perhaps that is a relevant pattern that the GRU then felt that this was something, but I would be speculating to go further than that.
Thank you. Let me move on to a slightly different point, but sticking with the GRU. If I could ask you to look again at your witness statement, but in fact it's an earlier part of your witness statement, so it's page 3, paragraph 11. We have there a statement of HMG's assessment and authorisation and so on. But moving on to paragraph 12, the first sentence of paragraph 12 reads, HMG considers that the outcome of the operation against Mr. Skripal was not intended to remain entirely covert. And then you give a little more sort of flesh on those bones in the remainder of that paragraph. So this would be GRU expectation that we're talking about, I think. What's your assessment in that regard?
So the reason I say I don't think that the operation was intended to remain entirely covert really comes down to the manner that was chosen to attempt the murder of Mr. Skripal. There are many ways in which you could have ambiguity in the minds of an investigating authority as to whether someone had died naturally or how they had died. Use of a nerve agent in this way is clearly going to be traced back to Russia. Even if it were not found in a post-mortem, say, the fact that it was sprayed on a door handle and that it persists in the environment means that people would have been, every time someone touched that door handle, they would have fallen ill. And so eventually it would have to have been found. So that's why I believe it wasn't intended to remain covert entirely. It was meant to remain. It was meant to act as a warning, in my view. Do you want me to go on to the rest of my paragraph?
Yes, please.
So I think what the Russian state, and particularly because of the nature of the victim, the Russian state would have expected us to put the UK to put two and two together and say this was the Russians. What I suspect they would not have been anticipating was how thoroughly and quickly we were able to set out what had happened, and the speed of which we internationalised or to made an international response happen, and therefore the speed in which Russia felt very serious consequences. Again, if I think back to the Litvinenko inquiry and affair, the Russians, I think I described it as stringing along the UK. Statements produced, offers made. I think the police were unable to go to Moscow and then found it very hard to interview anybody. They put such distance between the act and sort of final consideration of it. In this instance, the government went on the front foot quickly after just a day for the Russian side. And the response also with the, and I don't know if you want to cover this now or not, but the 153 Russian intelligence operatives who were expelled from across countries,
Yes.
I think, really shocked the Russian state.
And that happened when, very roughly? Over a period, obviously.
It happened over a period. The UK announced, the second statement to Parliament, the Prime Minister announced that 23 Russian intelligence operatives would be expelled and some other measures.
So that's the 14th
of March.
March, yep.
They were given a week to leave. And then there was an international response and over 153 officers expelled from, I think, 29 countries, which would have severely dismantled their network.
And when, roughly?
I would need to
All right.
check for sure, sir, but it was within 2 or 3 months afterwards.
That's what I needed to know. Thank you.
So one's experience, just they're not, when these expulsions take place, they're normally given a period of time to leave. Is that part of the story?
You must give people time to sort of pack their bags, etc.
Well, you've also got to do the international diplomacy, which leads to it. I understand all that. I'm just looking to see what, from the point of view of anybody watching from a hostile state, when they saw the results.
So I think the Russians would have been quite shocked.
Right.
They were constantly on the back foot. The Russian state is not good at working across government. So you've got this action that's carried out by the GRU, which, as I say, I think was authorised at the highest levels. But the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would have been out there trying to defend Russia, but without any real information. The other intelligence agencies probably wouldn't have known about it.
So when you say they're not good at working across government, do you mean internally?
Indeed.
I see.
So the Russians, I think, because we moved quickly, we're on the back foot from the start. And that's part of the reason you see all these competing narratives coming out and desperate attempts to throw mud about. They want to slow the government down, I think.
Right.
And, of course, there was a very good police operation, and we were ready within a few months to announce charges.
Yes. So we had been looking at paragraph 12 of your statement and your understanding of the GRU/Russian expectation. Let me move to another sort of factual issue relating to the attack. And you've mentioned the door handle yourself. If we could go back to the Sedwell letter, please. So that's INQ 003070. And now go to page 3 of that letter. At the very top, so this is within the second limb of the analysis, it's the operational experience, Mr. Allen. You will recall that reference at the top to HMG's understanding of Russian programs to test the means of delivering chemical warfare agents, to train personnel from special units in the use of these weapons, and for obvious reasons, attention is drawn to the understanding that one of the ways that the Russians had explored delivering nerve agents was by applying them to door handles. Are you able to help us? And this is one of the points, I won't go back to it, but it's one of the points made in that Russian embassy document, which is that if HMG was in possession of this information, linking Novichok to door handles, why it took a period of time, and we've heard that it took something approaching a fortnight, to make that connection of the door handle of the Skripal house as being the place where the poison, in fact, was delivered. Are you able to help us with what the answer to the question posed by the Russian embassy document there?
I'm afraid I would just be speculating if I were to. I don't have any information on that.
All right. Let me move on then to the question of sort of higher authorisation for the Skripal attack. It's sticking with your witness statement, so IMQ 005938. If we could go to page 4, please. We've discussed, Mr. Allen, the issues around authorisation within the GRU, and you've given your understanding that this wasn't, as it were, a renegade unit acting independently, but rather something that was authorised at the top of the GRU. I now want to ask you about even more senior authorisation. And if we look at paragraph 20, you refer there perhaps to something you've already mentioned, the sort of highly bureaucratic nature of the Russian state. And if we could scroll down to the next page at paragraph 21, you also there raise issues around the risks involved in this operation. And I'm going to take you to a few documents in a moment, but before I do so, can you just summarise your analysis around the sort of the highest level of your understanding of the authorisation for this attack?
So it's perhaps worth stating, it may be self-evident to state, but I don't have any document or statement that President Putin or anyone else said that they were responsible. So I'm going to be going off my knowledge and inference from it. And there are a series of strands which we should probably go through. On this strand, I say that the Russian state administration is highly bureaucratic. What is so within Russia, at each level you seek authorization for activity from the level above, and the level above's role is to oversee that you have carried out authorized activity. Initiative is extremely discouraged. Critical thinking is not part of Russian education. So the effect of this is that things go up through a bureaucracy at every level, being authorised by the next level up, and a sort of, if you like, that gives rise also to people seeking to ensure that they have cover for what they're doing. And then, in terms of the geopolitical risk, it is, this is such a significant thing to be doing, not least after the Litvinenko case, where Russia was found to have carried that out. So to be using a nerve agent entirely prohibited under international convention from even being possessed, let alone used, to then go to a capable actor like the United Kingdom with an effective law enforcement system, a permanent member of the Security Council, a NATO country, the risks involved in that reputationally are so enormous that it's my belief that that would not have been capable of being taken at the level of the head of GRU, or indeed at the boss of that, which is the defense minister, who was then Sergei Shoigu. It would have gone, in my view, to President Putin. They are such big issues, such big risks to be taking. So those are the two sides, if you like. One, the desire within Russian bureaucracy to get authorization at every level and to cover oneself, and secondly, the enormity of what is being done here and the risk that poses.
And just for completeness, we'll go back to some of those parts of the analysis, but for completeness, let's perhaps just go to paragraph 25 of your statement on page 6, at the top. And we see there, given some of the analysis, including relating to the 2006 law, which we'll come to in a moment, at the end of that paragraph, the assertion, the assessment, it is HMG's view that President Putin authorised the operation, by which you mean the attack on the Skripals.
Yes.
Let's, as I say then, if we may go back to look at some of the aspects of your reasoning. And first of all, could we just go, please, back one page in your statement, page 5, and paragraph 22. You refer at paragraph 22 to the Russian Federal Law 153 FZ of June 2006. I'm going to take you to a few references relating to that law, Mr. Allen, but can you, in a few sentences, summarise what is remarkable, special about that particular law?
Yes, my reason for including it in my statement is really to make clear that this law provides for the security services to act outside the territory of the Russian Federation in order to eliminate a threat to security. But the key point I want to stress is the by decision of the President of the Russian Federation.
Yes.
So it's making clear that that's where the decision-making is.
It may not be the only country in the world that authorises its security operatives to work outside its own country. You're drawing attention to the authorisation, are you?
Indeed.
I follow.
Let's go, if we may, briefly to the Litvinenko report itself, because it's right, isn't it, that Sir Robert Owen undertook a rather detailed assessment of, in fact, that law and another law that was passed in 2006.
He did, yes.
Could we go, please, to INQ 005335, which is the report, page 86. And we see the heading of that part of the report, the 2006 Russian laws, and casting our eye down to paragraph 5.4, there's a reference to the law FZ 2006 on counteraction of terrorism. In fact, the number isn't quite the same, but let's not worry about that. We can see at the end of that paragraph, there's a reference to one of the striking features of the terrorism law, as it's described, being that it makes provision for Russian forces to take action against terrorism beyond the borders of the Russian Federation. So is this the same statute we're discussing here as the one you referred to in your statement?
Yes.
And it's right, isn't it, that Sir Robert Owen in fact received some expert evidence about the meaning of this law as well as the other law passed in 2006. And we can see, if we go very briefly to page 239 of his report, please. Yeah, I think it's... Just bear with me a moment. Yes, at the very bottom of that page, please, paragraph 9.197, he concluded that the strict terms of the 2006 laws, plural, did not permit the FSB to take action against extremists as opposed to terrorists outside the borders of Russia. He also, sorry, so in fact that's a reference to the other law, but he also concluded, did he not, that Mr. Litvinenko had not, on the face of it, conducted acts that would bring him within the scope of the terrorism law, the one we're discussing, because he hadn't conducted any acts of terrorism.
Yes, that's right.
But what Sir Robert went on to say is that the passing of those laws had a wider effect. We can see here what is said about Professor Service's evidence in that regard.
Yes.
I want to be clear about this because, again, in the Russian embassy document, the point is made that these laws wouldn't have covered Mr. Skripal in terms of what it is understood that he did or didn't do. But as I understand your statement, is that in fact what you're saying, that Mr. Skripal would have fallen within the scope of the laws, or are you making a slightly different point?
So I'm not making any judgment or assertion as to whether Mr. Skripal would or wouldn't. It's fair to say that the Russian state uses the word terrorist fairly indiscriminately, including, for example, everybody fighting in Ukraine for Ukrainian forces are routinely described as terrorists. The point I wanted to make was around the level of authorization. So I'm suggesting that if it is for one of the special services to carry out an operation to eliminate a threat to security under the terrorism law overseas, if for that you need the authorization of the Russian president, it would seem that to carry out an operation to eliminate a perceived threat to security that does not come under the terrorism laws, you would also need the authorization of the Russian president. It seems they are, to me, analogous levels of risk and hold the same sorts of constraints, therefore.
Yes. So it is a reference to them by analogy rather than their strict
Indeed.
terms. Could I ask you about another document, which I think is very much another aspect of what you're saying, which is INQ 006200. Now, Mr. Allen, this is in terms of what's available to us on our document management system, what we have here is a Russian document, which is in fact the latter pages of the document as we see it, and an English translation of that Russian document. That's right, isn't it?
That's right, yes.
And if we could start.
Is it an official document, Mr. O'Connor, or
Well,
what? Or are you going to come to this?
I'm going to come to exactly that. If we could just expand for the moment this bottom half of the page, starting with the red text. We can see the heading National Defence, the date November the 20th, so very recent.
Very recent.
And there is there's the name Sergei Narishkin, and then below that, interview of the director of the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation. So, with those little references, can you, Mr. Allen, explain what this document is?
Yes, so this is a published interview available openly. The Sergei Narishkin is the director of the Foreign Intelligence Service in Russia. I'm not sure. So the equivalent, if you like, of our MI6. So they're obviously a very different organisation, I hasten to say.
And is that what's sometimes known as the SVR?
The SVR, yes.
Yeah.
And he's talking to a sort of security specialist journalist, more wide than perhaps a journalist, in this National Defence magazine. So it's a sort of specialist magazine, if you like.
But published openly in Russia.
Yeah, this document was taken from the internet, I believe.
And the English text then is a translation of the original Russian.
Yes, it's been machine translated.
Exactly. So if we were to scroll through, what we see on pages 2, 3, and 4, and so on, is a machine translation of the original Russian.
Yes.
And if we, in fact, could go to page 5, we'll come to the significance of the yellow in a moment, but this page generally is that part of the machine translation of the original Russian text.
Yes.
But the yellow paragraph, is that a paragraph that you regard as being of particular importance to the issues we're discussing today?
Yes, it is.
And for that reason, have you, or someone else who works for you, commissioned as it were, human expert translation of that particular part of the article?
Yes, I had that paragraph translated by a human as well.
And I think I'm right in saying that if we go back to page 1 of this document as we have it, is that the part we haven't looked at the top? Is that a, as it were, an expert translation of that particular paragraph of the interview of the article?
Yes, that's right. In the full document, there's the English version, the Russian version, and that is a full proper translation of the Russian version.
And so let's just read it. It says, overall leadership of our external intelligence organs is exercised by the President of the Russian Federation. He determines the tasks of our intelligence activity and oversees and coordinates the activity of our external intelligence organs. Are those the words of the interviewer or Mr. Narishkin?
Those are the words of Mr. Narishkin.
And help us then with their significance.
It reinforces in Sergei Narishkin's mind how crucial the role of President Putin is in the actions of his service. And you'll note it says external intelligence organs, so it's in the plural. And I think that therefore can be safely adduced to mean all of those who operate internationally, which of course the GRU does. And he is very clear, I think, about the fact that not only are the tasks being determined, but then there's the overseeing and coordinating the activity. So it suggests to me a significant amount not only of authorization, but of reporting back along the way. And that would be consistent with my understanding of how the intelligence agencies work in Russia.
And we mentioned at the outset, in fact, this is very recent, only a week or so ago.
Indeed.
And I don't know whether this further document I'm going to go to was part of your consideration or not, Mr. Allen, but I think for completeness it's worth looking at. It's the witness statement of Mr. Skripal himself. So if we could go to INQ 006086, please, at page 6. I don't know, in fact, if you've seen this statement, Mr. Allen. It was produced for the inquiry probably a couple of months ago. Well, it's dated October of this year. But if we look at paragraph 18, he expresses the view, I believe Putin makes all important decisions himself. I therefore think he must have at least given permission for the attack on Yulia and me. Any GRU commander taking a decision like this without Putin's permission would have been severely punished. In fact, in fairly pithy terms, very much the view you've expressed, Mr. Allen.
Absolutely. He is, of course, extremely well placed to know. I suspect that view would be held universally across the sort of senior ranks of the intelligence services.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I'd like to move on. We've been discussing authorisation. I'd like to move on to the related topic of motive. And we could start, please, by going back to the Sedwell letter. So INQ 003070. And in fact, if we go to page 3, motive was, you'll recall, the third of the 3 limbs of the analysis there. Was it not?
Yes.
And there's a reference in that paragraph, as we know, to Sergei Skripal having been convicted of espionage in Russia in 2004. And then the assessment, or the statement, it is highly likely that the Russian intelligence services view at least some of its defectors as legitimate targets for assassination. Just holding that in our minds, if we could then go forward back to your statement, please, which is INQ 005938. And if we could, paragraph 5. Page 5, paragraph 22. Towards the bottom of that paragraph, this is the paragraph talking about the law, the terrorism law, but you say, you assert HMG's view that the GRU conducting an operation in the UK to eliminate someone perceived to be a traitor, especially given the manner in which that operation was conducted, would require a comparable level of decision-making and so on. But the words I wanted to highlight were perceived to be a traitor. Is that, so we see Sir Mark Sedwell talking about a general assessment that highly likely that the Russian intelligence services view at least some of its defectors as legitimate targets. Something similar, but perhaps slightly more specific in your statement, an assessment that he was perceived to be a traitor. Is that the assessment of the government currently?
Yes, I mean, he obviously was convicted.
Well, we know he was perceived to be a traitor because he was prosecuted for it
And convicted of treason.
and convicted. He was also pardoned, wasn't he?
He was so, yes.
Right. Does that make any difference or not?
Well, I note that Mr. Skripal himself has said he thinks it made a difference. I think in some of his statements he said that he believed that the pardon outside Russia would protect him. What clearly is the case that it didn't. So perhaps something's changed, or
Yeah, again.
We may come back to that, Mr. Allen, but just sticking with your statement for the moment, in fact, if we scroll down on this page, you have referred in the next 2 paragraphs to various statements made by Mr. Putin about traitors and what will befall them. Perhaps this picks up on the discussion about Mr. Litvinenko, because I don't think all these statements were made expressly regarding Mr. Skripal.
no.
They are certainly all of a theme, are they not?
Yes, they are. And there is a reference to Mr. Skripal in para 24.
Yes, and that is in fact the one we will look at more closely in a few moments. But certainly, President Putin's public position regarding what traitors are like and what should happen to them is not hard to understand, is it?
No, he is very clearly setting contextually his belief, what he thinks about them and what he thinks should happen.
I did, in fact, want to go back to Mr. Skripal's witness statement. So if we could go to INQ 006086, please. We'll come back briefly to what he said about his pardon, but before that, could we go to page 6, paragraph 19? He refers here, and you may be aware, Mr. Allen, that he had expanded a little on these points in his police interviews, which we've seen. He refers to 2 things. First of all, he says, while I was working GRU Special Services, I had access to secret information. And then he goes on to say he was aware of allegations that Putin had been involved in illegal activity to do with the disposal of rare metals. As I say, in his police interview, he talked about embezzlement of the proceeds of sale of aluminium when Putin was in St. Petersburg. Is it possible, are you able to help us whether either or both of these matters, either the fact that Mr. Skripal may have been privy to some very secret information, or separately his knowledge of what he regards as Putin's criminal embezzlement, whether either of those matters could have had anything to do by way of motive with the attack on him?
I mean, I take them at face value. It makes sense that if he was working as a senior member of the GRU that he would have access to secret information. I don't know myself what he did and didn't have access to. On the allegations regarding President Putin, if it's helpful, it's perhaps worth saying it is very difficult to know exactly what happens in Russia. The civil society is pretty non-existent. Independent media has been shut down. The judicial system operates to protect the government and and President Putin. But there have been, numerous open source works which link senior figures in government, including the president, to control of natural resources, control of the sources of Russia's wealth, and suggestions they've profited from those. And certainly, President Putin is at the top of a state that is highly corrupt and which ensures loyalty through both patronage and fear. So, to that degree, I would say they could well be motives.
All right. let's, if we may, go back to the page before the one we're looking at in Mr. Skripal's statement. The chair's already raised the question of pardon, but it's right, and you, I think, Mr. Allen, mentioned the fact that Sergei Skripal himself had referred to it, and it's true. For example, at paragraph 14, he refers to Medvedev, because in fact it was Medvedev who was president at the time in 2010 when Skripal left Russia.
Yes, that's right.
So it was he who signed the presidential pardon, as Mr. Skripal says there in paragraph 14. He then, if we cast our eyes down, we can see 4 lines down in paragraph 15. He refers again to having received a presidential pardon, being a free man with no convictions under Russian law. And then I think the reference you had in mind, if we go down to the bottom of paragraph 16, he said, a pardon is only a piece of paper when in Russia, but so far as I'm aware, an exchange of prisoners is normally respected between states. What I wanted to ask you really was how you've described your assessment that his status as a traitor may have been a motive for the attack on him. How does this pardon play into that assessment, if at all?
So, again, I mean, I think when he talks about what he thought, what protection he thought it would give him, I think he's very well placed to give that view, and I would have nothing to say against that or in addition. I think the only thing I would say is that over the course of a number of years, the Russian state became increasingly intolerant to opposition and dissent. So I've talked about shutting down civil society, independent media. Obviously, there are no free elections in Russia, and there are various actions overseas. We've talked about Litvinenko, we've obviously talked about Navalny within Russia. There are others overseas as well. So it is clearly becoming a more hostile environment towards dissent wherever it might be found.
Even during that period, say 2010 to 2018?
Yes, I think it got progressively harder line. There are cases we could talk about in other countries.
Right. That's fine, thank you. Let's just move, if we may, to another document, although sticking with the theme of traitors. It's INQ 004797. Mr. Allen, this is a short email chain. I think we'll see it's within the Foreign Office. It's not particularly easy to tell with the redactions, but they seem to be essentially Foreign Office with 1 or 2 Cabinet Office recipients. And I think you're familiar with this document. If we could just look from the bottom, please. Starting then on the 3rd of October. So in terms of the chronology, we are some way on in 2018. We're after the announcement in the UK of charges. We're after the RT interview with Petrov and Bosharov, which we will come to in due course. A Foreign Office official, on the face of it, is sending to other Foreign Office officials a record of something that President Putin has said. As concerns the Skripals, this new spy scandal is being blown out of proportion artificially. I see some of your colleagues are advancing the theory that Mr. Skripal is practically a human rights defender. He's just a spy, a traitor to his motherland. There is such a term, traitor to one's motherland. He is one of them. And then it's recorded, Putin said he hopes the Skripal affair ends soon, and in quotes, I think it will happen sometime. I hope the information campaign surrounding the Skripal affair will end. The sooner it ends, the better. And then a little later, in fact only a few minutes later, on the same day, a further sort of tranche, a further report of something else that President Putin is sent it says, President Putin said, if we're talking about Skripal being poisoned there, do you want to say we've also poisoned some homeless person? I sometimes look at what is happening with this case and I'm just surprised. Some guys come and begin poisoning homeless people there. Nonsense. What, do they work for some kind of cleansing department? This Skripal, as I said, is a traitor. He was caught, he was punished. He spent a total of 5 years in jail and we released him. That was it. He left and continued cooperating, and he consulted some special services. And then lastly, if we could scroll to the top, we can see a reply from Laurie Bristow. What was his post at the time in question?
He was the ambassador in Moscow.
And he gives the reply to all of this. Perhaps VVP, who's VVP?
That's President Putin.
Perhaps President Putin should have quit while he was ahead. So just a few questions about all of that. First of all, at least some of those references to traitors and so on are actually transposed into those sections of the witness statement we were just looking at, aren't they?
Yes.
In terms of President Putin's, what President Putin is trying to convey here, and this may come back to the discussion we were having about Mr. Lugovoy earlier, is this intended to be part of a denial of responsibility or involvement in the Skripal attack, or a justification of it, in your understanding?
So I think you see a little bit of the similar activity. Mr. Putin is always extremely careful with the precise words he says. It's very hard to pin a meaning on it. He often has a slightly ambiguous meaning, but intends for he hopes the intent will come through. So I think the comment around this an information campaign ending is a sort of suggestion that nothing really happened, I think, that this is just an information campaign got up by the UK and the West. The comments around Mr. Skripal, I think, are, again, quite dismissive of Mr. Skripal. He is just a spy, a traitor to his motherland. He's one of them. And I think that's part of the wider picture of extremely negative and dismissive comments about people he considers to be traitors, making clear contextually his view. Do you want me to go on to the rest? Or?
Yes, do, please.
I think the second part, I mean, it's of course, when you read it, it's extremely offensive and rather callous comments, and I assume that those are meant to be referencing Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley, but they are, as I say, offensive in the extreme, and again rather indicative perhaps of his rather dismissive attitude to what's happened.
They're essentially denial, though, aren't they?
They are. Without
What a crazy allegation is the
exactly.
sense of it.
What could you mean? How could we possibly? That it's without saying the words "I deny this."
Yeah.
While we're on the middle email, as it were, and the reference to homeless people, we can see at the bottom of that email, Mr. Putin goes back to the Skripal case. He again refers to him as a traitor, having been caught, having been punished, having spent a total of 5 years in jail, being released. And then these words, he left and continued cooperating, and he consulted some special services. Is it possible, Mr. Allen, that the Russian motivation for the attack may have lain in what they thought Skripal had done after, rather than before his pardon?
I'll be honest and say I found that sentence quite ambiguous, but I suspect you might need another witness to talk to you about that sort of matter, I'm afraid.
Just finally going to the top, what do you think, if you can, help us, that the ambassador meant by Mr. Putin quitting while he was ahead?
I haven't asked Laurie what he...
Sorry, did you say you have or you haven't?
I haven't asked Laurie what he meant. So my reading of it would be that it's a reference to those rather offensive comments about poisoning homeless people, that it betrays quite a lot of Putin's character. And I think that's probably what Laurie meant, but I don't know.
Thank you. We've, for obvious reasons, spoken a lot about the government's assessment about Russian state responsibility, and we've heard now a lot of evidence about the source of that assessment, the developing understanding of the Novichok in Salisbury, Petrov and Boshrov, and so on. I'd like, though, to ask you about what, if any, thought has been given to the possibility that other states may have been responsible. And in order to do that, could we go, please, back to your statement? So it's INQ 005938, page 6. And it's paragraph 26. And what you say here, Mr. Allen, is in the immediate aftermath of this attack, HMG maintained an open mind as to who was responsible for the attack, and HMG and the police simply followed the evidence where it led. Following the investigations, which have since been conducted, however, HMG has not identified any evidence which would support the suggestion that any state other than Russia was responsible. Can you expand on that, Mr. Allen? In particular, can you help us? Is it simply a sort of what you're describing, as it were, a passive exercise of waiting to see if any evidence of other state responsibility turns up, and on what we read here, that not having been the case? Or has there been some sort of proactive exercise in challenging the assessments we've heard about and trying to think about any possibility that you might be wrong and that there might be other states involved?
Well, I think to start with, the really important point in here is, of course, that in the UK, these investigations start with and are led by the police. And so you've heard a lot of evidence, I know, from police witnesses, and they follow the set of procedures they need to follow. Of course, once the weapon had been, if you like, identified, and Mr. Skripal's status had been uncovered or understood, rather, that led to that initial conclusion from the government. And my sort of understanding is that since then, every additional piece of evidence that's been found from the police investigation or the OPCW have simply added to that view. So I think that statement is that when we started this police-led investigation, we began with that open mind. We went quite quickly down a particular route because, if I've said here other state responsibility, I could equally talk about non-state actors. But we've heard that for terrorists or criminals to get hold of this substance would be extremely difficult. It was high purity. It was manufactured by a state, and then it seems unlikely that there's a particular motive there that would deduce to either a non-state actor or any other state. So that collectively led to that conclusion.
Thank you. Final general topic is some more focused questions about the Russian response to the Skripal incident and in particular to the series of UK assessments, public statements that we have heard about. You've already given us some insight into this. We heard from Commander Murphy about what he described as a disinformation campaign. And I take it from what you've already said that you would agree with that characterisation of
Yes.
what was going on.
Yes, I would.
Just to put a little more detail onto that, if we could go to document INQ 004774, please. Just go to the first page initially, please. this is it's a similar type of document to the one we looked at right at the beginning with your statement to the Security Council. It's a government publication, and we can see towards the bottom of the text there, this is in fact dated the 6th of September. It's a statement given to the Security Council on the 6th of September. And is it right? This is a statement made by Karen Pearce, who did she arrive, as it were, to fill the job of being the senior representative of the UK in that posting?
Yes, she arrived earlier that year.
But am I right, after the time that you had served as a chargé d'affaires?
Yes, I think it was in April. I might be wrong. April, May.
And this is, we won't look at it at length, but this is another stage in that public exercise of asserting HMG's views about Russian responsibility. But if we could go to page 6, please, we can see that. So 3 paragraphs down from the top, you can see there's a section where the ambassador says, "Madam President, we are now up to some 37 accounts from Russia as to why and how Salisbury took place. I think none hold water." I mean, is that as a sort of measure of calibrating HMG's response and understanding of what was going on? That's quite stark language that was used.
Yes, there were some were more official than others. Russian state uses proxies who are licensed to speak on behalf of them on TV. Lots of different accounts. Absolutely.
We've referred throughout our proceedings to what I described today as the Russian embassy document, and in fact I've asked you about 1 or 2 passages within it. Do you regard that document itself as part of what Commander Murphy described as the disinformation campaign?
Yes, I do.
First of all, just by way of context, that document, I think, is dated earlier this year, but there have been a series of similar documents published over time, haven't there?
Yes, the Russians put a number of questions out at different points.
And you addressed this in your statement. So if we could go back to it, please, IMQ 005938. This is page 7. And if we could go to the bottom of the page, it's paragraph 32. And going over the page, you refer to this as a document that has been updated over time. The most recent version, which is the one we've been looking at, published in March 2023. You say it's an attempt to divert attention from a fact-driven explanation. You describe it as a more subtle approach than outright disinformation. Can you expand on those points for us?
I can, and tell me if this is useful or not. Would it be helpful if I said a little bit about how we perceive the Russian disinformation machine to work?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of examples from this case, but essentially at the heart of it is denial. So an ability to deny everything, hopefully plausibly, but even if implausibly, and to build various lies, I would say, around that denial. So the heart of it is denial. The second sort of part then is what has been described as sort of whataboutism. So, and you see some of this in the embassy document. So lots of, well, what about this? What about that in the embassy document? What about the pets? What about the fact that first responders didn't fall ill? And this is designed to throw dust in people's eyes and to try and divert attention. And then normally building on that, you then get sort of outright conspiracy theories. And I would say those aren't specifically in the document to the same extent as they were around at the time. So people said, for example, that the United Kingdom had done this to divert from Brexit or to divert from, I think to undermine the World Cup being held in Russia. There were all sorts of conspiracy theories. Again, designed to appeal to some segment of a population or of a country. the Russians don't really mind if anyone believes it fully. The point is that there's doubt, and then that becomes a win for them in their minds. And I think the last part I would say about this disinformation and undermining is it's partly aimed internally at the Russian people to say, see, other countries do these things, and so to sort of try and normalise what the Russian state itself does.
Thank you. One section of the embassy document, towards the end, in fact, contains a series of complaints that the UK government has, as it were, failed on the diplomatic plane. So, for example, failing to respond to note verbal formal diplomatic communications, failing to provide consular access to the Skripals, failing to engage with these criminal processes. I'm not going to go through those one by one, and in fact you've already touched on this in your earlier evidence, but what is your response to those type of complaints?
Yeah. Well, so there was an extraordinary number of not verbals sent by the Russian embassy. I think designed in part to sort of try and overwhelm a bit. I think the intent is to try and, either the FCDO doesn't reply, in which case the Russian embassy will say, oh, well, they're not replying, they must have something to hide. Or we would engage on a topic of, sort of conspiracy topic, and then they would be able to say, aha, look, there's something in it, they're telling us this or that. Overall, I think they show the fact that the Russian state was extremely unhappy that we had proceeded at pace with this robust response and hadn't allowed them to play the games they had played before. If you would like me to, I can address the point around the consular access or any other points you want to.
Well, give a sort of brief response, because that is a particular complaint made in the embassy document.
So the consular affairs are governed internationally by the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, and specifically bilaterally, there is a treaty that goes back to a treaty with the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union, which the Russian Federation is the inheritor of. The important thing to say is that in neither document is there any obligation on a citizen to receive consular assistance. So in this instance, the UK, the government passed on to Sergei Skripal, the offer of consular assistance from the Russian government, as we were bound to do. They chose not, for obvious reasons, perhaps, to take it up.
Thank you. Very lastly, I think, I wanted to ask you some questions about the Russia Today interview, which we have watched about 1.5 times now, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. We will recall that it was broadcast on the 13th of September, so a week or so after the announcement in London of the CPS decision to bring charges against Petrov and Boshrov. I'm going to ask you some particular questions about RT and the interviewer, but in general, what was your reaction to the interview?
I've watched it again recently, actually, in order to prepare for today. I think I would take two particular things. The first is it reinforces to me the culpability of those involved and the Russian state. Because of the fact that they tell obvious falsehoods throughout it, starting with their names and then around the purpose of their visit to Salisbury. They make claims that are disproved by CCTV and other evidence, and of course by the fact that they clearly had handled the Novichok because it was found in their hotel room. So they discredit themselves, but the fact that RT is, I think you want to come to, is essentially a propaganda organ of the Russian state. And President Putin had said earlier that day that these two might appear. It suggests to me that President Putin had therefore been consulted in the decision to put them in front of the cameras. And therefore, the Russian state equally is demonstrating its culpability through this false account. And then the only second thing that occurs to me, I think, is that there is an attempt to offer other false narratives, back to my sort of the whataboutism. There's a moment where they hold up photographs of the interviewer of, I think, Gatwick Airport or something, and that's the sort of part of let's try and spin some alternative narratives.
Well, and you mentioned RT being a propaganda vehicle. In your statement, so if we could go to it, please, INQ 005938, page 6, paragraph 28, you make some detailed points about sanctions visited on RT by Ofcom in this country. We can see them there, which end, in fact, in March 2022, so after, obviously, 2018, RT apparently now had its licence revoked.
That's right.
And in fact, it's on the next page. If we could go on to it, paragraph 31. We will all recall from having watched the video the interviewer, whose name is Margarita Simonyan, if I've pronounced that right.
Yes.
She was in fact not just a journalist, but I think it's right to say she had a more prominent role within RT than that. Is that right, or am I misremembering?
She's the editor-in-chief.
Yeah.
Of RT.
Of RT.
And what you refer to in this paragraph is an incident, again, which took place much later, so in August 2022, relating to an incident involving the killing of someone called Daria Dugina. We can have a look at the documents in a minute, but could you just give us a summary of what happened and why it's of significance to us?
Yes, the thing I think she sent a tweet to this effect. This is the translation here, and I think the particularly relevant sentence is the sentence, "I am sure we have professionals who want to admire spires in Tallinn," and that's a clear reference to the RT interview done originally in 2018, where there was if you remember, one of the individuals was quick to talk about the spire of Salisbury Cathedral and it being 123 metres high. That became something of a internet sensation, a bit of a meme, and I think what is happening here is she is riding on that, remembering it, pulling it out again, and of course it's back to that thing I've described earlier, while denying at the same time sending a clear message here, in this case, that she's encouraging Russian services to try and eliminate the individual who's carried this out.
And when you say carried this out, as I said, that there was apparently a murder. At least as it was understood at the time, it was the murder of a Russian by people who might have been regarded as the enemies of the Russian state, who then subsequently left Russia.
And that would certainly be the perspective of Simonyan.
Yes, and so there was that parallel, perhaps, with
Yes.
their understanding of the Skripal case in terms of people being sent, professionals, to use her word, being sent overseas to deal with people who were, perhaps to use President Putin's word, traitors.
Yes, to eliminate a threat to security. So
So the person who'd been killed was not a dissident.
the person killed was not a dissident. She was a Russian who was supportive of both President Putin and of the war in Ukraine.
Right. And the assertion, at least, was that whoever had killed her was opposed to the Russian state.
Yes.
Got it.
Let's just, I think we've covered the issue, but very briefly, if just call up on screen, if we could have 006201. in Russian, but as far as you understand it, is that the tweet?
That's
Or,
it.
in fact, I think it was a message on Telegram or Messenger or one of the other social media channels. But was that the message sent by the interviewer?
Yes, it was.
And then if we could have INQ 005939. Is this an article, in fact, I think from The Guardian, which a contemporaneous account of this episode?
Yes.
Thank you. And then very lastly, about Margarita Simonian, has she subsequently been made the subject of sanctions?
Yes, she has. The UK, the US, I think the EU as well. Would you like me to say?
If you could summarise your understanding of the basis of that
Yeah.
action.
So the basis of the sanctions were that she was actively promoting policies that were undermine the territorial integrity of Ukraine. So they were brought on a Ukraine basis. But this is someone who has said publicly that she only obeys orders from the Kremlin. She has said in interviews that she has a hotline to the Kremlin on her desk. She has received numerous awards and honours for services to Russia. She is someone who presides over Russia Today, which I'm happy to talk about Russia Today separately if that would be helpful. And under her, it is clearly a propaganda organ of the Russian state.
Thank you.
Right.
So that is in fact the end of the questions I wanted to ask Mr. Allen. I've noticed the time. I've gone a little bit past.
I've seen it as well, Mr. O'Connor.
for
Let me
lunch.
just inquire. Mr. Roy, do you want to give me an idea of how long you might want to be?
Mr. Mansfield and I hopefully will be finished within 15 minutes,
Right.
perhaps less.
Has anybody else any questions for this witness? No. How are you placed? Well, I'm inclined, Mr. Allen, if you can bear it, to let you finish it off, as it were, without having to come back after lunch. Can you bear that?
Of course, sir.
Then don't feel under pressure of time, either of you. But if that's a realistic estimate, we'll do it now.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Allen, I ask questions on behalf of the family of Dawn Sturgess. Just a few incidental questions, please. Could we have, please, on screen Mr. Allen's witness statement, INQ 005938, page 3. Paragraph 13, please, if you could zoom into that. Mr. Allen, here you explain, so 3 lines down, the manner in which the GRU applied the nerve agent and subsequently discarded it suggests that those who conducted the operation, and these are the key words I'm interested in, as well as those who authorised it, were indifferent to the fact that people other than Mr. Skripal could be killed or seriously injured as a result of their actions. Can you explain in any more detail your thinking behind that, in particular about the point of those who authorised the operation?
Well, I would say by definition, using a nerve agent in a residential area of a city carries high risk to others, not just the individuals concerned that they were seeking to, or the individual they were seeking to attack. And so I would say that demonstrates a recklessness on part of those who conceived and authorised the operation. They were clearly, in my view, indifferent if the others were caught up or not.
Thank you. The next topic is we have heard evidence about some explosions in the Czech Republic in 2014, and we've seen a report from NATO which states that the Czech government came to the conclusion that Mishkin and Chapiga and GRU Unit 29155 were responsible for that explosion. And it also says that the Czech government briefed NATO on that conclusion. My question to you is, was the UK a party to the NATO briefing in respect of that?
Yes, it would have been, yes.
What do you mean, received it?
Did it receive it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean, Mr. Straw?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, sorry. Would have received the briefing as one of the member states of NATO, yes.
And did the UK accept the Czech conclusion?
Yes, we do.
Moving on to what you have already explained about the disinformation campaign by the Russian state, is it your opinion that that disinformation campaign further demonstrates the Russian state's culpability?
Yes.
I'd like to look at a couple more of examples, please, of that. Could we have, please, the video INQ 006102? This is a video, sir, that was published in the Daily Mail,
Yes.
but it includes Mr. Putin, as we'll see in a moment, sitting alongside other world leaders, including Mr. Xi from China. Could you play on, please? Thank you.
В принципе, они вполне реализуемы.
Sorry, can you pause for a moment? I'm sorry, I should have given the context. So he says here, we know who they are. The context is Mr. Mishkin and Mr. Chepiga. So this is a interview being given shortly after the Prime Minister's statement in September 2018. And so Mr. Putin here is commenting on Mr. Mishkin, Mr. Chepiga, who were referred
And
to.
therefore sometime before the RT interview, is that right?
I'm not sure of the exact sequencing. It's around the same time, sir.
Right.
Thank you. And sorry, could we play on, please?
Thank you very much.
Они вполне реализуемы. Мы, конечно, посмотрели, что это за люди. Мы знаем, кто они такие уже. Мы их нашли. Ну, надеюсь, что они сами появятся и сами себе расскажут. Это будет лучше для всех. Ну, ничего там особенного и криминального нет, уверяю вас. Ну, посмотрим в ближайшее время.
Они гражданские?
Что?
Они гражданские?
Не слышу.
Гражданские?
Гражданские, конечно. Ну, конечно. В принципе, они вполне...
Thank you. So the answer to your question came then, that it appears that was just before the RT interview.
Yes. Well, you told me that you understood that Mr. Putin had you had concluded that Mr. Putin had been consulted about the proposed interview. Had you got this in mind or something else?
That's right. Yes, he trails the interview.
Exactly.
And sort of, I hope they will come and tell their story, and then,
Yes.
and then they do.
I see. Thank you very much.
And at the end there, he says Petrov and Boshirov were civilians. Now, to take some words from paragraph 30 of your witness statement, is it your view that that's obviously false?
It's obviously false, yes.
And we've seen Mr. Putin there asserting we know who they are. Is it also your opinion that he would know that that was obviously false?
Yes.
Thank you. We heard on the 13th of November that on the 20th of March 2018, Mr. Putin commented on the Skripal attack and denied that Russia had any military-grade nerve agent. Again, as I understand it from your evidence today, the HMG assessment is that's false.
Yes.
And can you tell us, would Mr. Putin have known whether or not Russia had Novichok?
Yes, he would.
Similarly, the foreign minister of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, said on the 14th of March 2018 that Russia had completely destroyed its chemical arms. So the reference for that, and I didn't propose to go there, is INQ 004813, page 6.
Thank you.
I think you've already answered that that's false, but is Mr. Lavrov a close ally of Mr. Putin?
Yes, he's been his foreign minister for 20 years.
Cheers. The next question concerns the Intelligence and Security Committee report. Could we have on screen, please, INQ 005686? Page 12. And paragraph 13, please. Yes, you can see that there. So could you zoom in on the third bullet point, please? So it says here, GCHQ has also advised that Russian GRU actors have orchestrated phishing attempts against government departments. To take one example, there were attempts against, redacted, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the DSTL during the early stages of the investigation into the Salisbury attacks. Are you able to explain any more in open in this session as to what's said there?
I must say I haven't gone into the detail of this particular incident, but I imagine GCHQ have given evidence to the ISC, probably in a closed session there. This would be an open report from them. I would assume that is correct.
Yep. Thank you. And the final question from me, please. EU regulations which sanctioned Russian officials in connection with Mr. Navalny's poisoning contain reasons for doing so, which included that the Novichok, and I quote, is accessible only to state authorities in the Russian Federation. So the reference, if need be, is INQ 005315.
Thank you.
Page 5. So the point is accessible only to state authorities in the Russian Federation. Does the UK government share that assessment?
Yes, we do. As you'll recall, we offered the Russian state an opportunity to explain if they'd lost control of any of their nerve agent, and they never suggested that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Those are all my questions. So I understand Mr. Mansfield has some submissions to add, if he may. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. Everybody's aware, acutely, we're at the threshold of the closed session.
Yeah.
And I think you've understood that we'd just like a brief moment today, but on Monday, I'm afraid I certainly will need a little more time to expand on the reason for the position today. Namely, there are questions, a lot of questions, that we would not like to ask concerned with the issue of preventability.
Yes.
And safeguards for the public, protections for the public, and why in our submission so far there's no evidence that any were in place. However, leaving that to one side for the moment, the questions that arise, that I just give an example of the ones that would arise with this witness, because he's given evidence about these areas, and in normal circumstances one would expect the ability to pursue it a little bit in relation to the issue I'm talking about, namely preventability. Two of the points come from the Sedwell will letter, which you know only too well. The first and main one, which one would want to ask this witness, is the extent to which this Novichok program linked to assassinations was being practiced on door handles and was known before the attack in Salisbury.
Yeah, well, that's a reference to one of the paragraphs in Sir Mark's letter, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yep.
So I think I don't need to labour the fact of the questions that obviously flow from that.
Yes.
And as I understand it, your ruling is in relation to that is it's for the closed session.
I'm afraid it is, Mr.
Yes.
Mansfield, but it's helpful to be reminded of what you may take it I very much have in mind, namely that preventability,
Yes.
or what you assert is preventability,
Can
ought to be investigated
Yes.
in some detail in the closed hearings, and it will be.
Well, the family be much obliged. I'm doing it because they're anxious that
Of course.
the public know that these are questions that they want asked on behalf of the public and themselves. The two other obvious examples that arise from this witness today is can I put it this way, the cyber interest in the scribbles that dates back to 2013.
I think in Yulia particularly, but yes, 2013, yep.
And as the witness himself said today, the importance of it was the breadth, the length of that time. And the obvious questions are, what's been going on between 2013?
Well, are they connected? And if so, what's been going on in the meantime? Yes.
And on Monday, with your permission, I seek to say how they relate to what actually happened. And finally, a question which this witness has said he can't really answer and another witness should. So I wouldn't be able to ask him anyway. And that is...
Never mind, tell me what it is.
Yes, I'll just mention it. The question is, what was Mr. Skripal up to?
Oh, I see.
Between his arrival here and particularly in the run-up to the Russian election, which was happening
what you mean, I think, is was he doing anything which might have generated a motive?
Exactly.
Got it.
The perceived threat.
Yes, all right.
So those are just a teaser, as it were, for Monday.
You underestimate yourself, Mr. Mansfield, but I have got those points. Thank you very much. Nobody else? Well, you needn't answer those questions now, Mr. Allen, for obvious reasons. In the meantime, I'm grateful to you for what you've been able to tell me, and I'll make of it what I can. Is that the business for today?
It does conclude.
And indeed, the case as a whole, as it can be conducted in open, is that right?
That is all the open evidence that we shall be calling, sir, yes.
Right. So on Monday, I'll receive submissions from those who wish to make them. It's clear that Mr. Mansfield is one of those. I'm expecting to have a notice by tomorrow evening, close of play 4:30, of what the substance of those is, and indeed of who's going to be making them, because at the moment I don't know. But subject to that, and with the prospect of an interesting weekend for all concerned, we'll meet, please, at 10 o'clock on Monday. Thank you for your help, Mr. Allen.